Master.
Going to the electric chair is, as morbid as it may sound, it's been a fantasy of mine. I used to think about that a long time ago when I was 9 years old. I used to dream about my own death, so it was just intriguing. It was almost like I was romantic with the subject of death. I don't care how I die as long as I do so. I have nothing left on earth. Roderick Ferrell.
On November 25th, 1996, Jennifer Windorf came back home late from hanging out with her friends. She was well past her curfew and she didn't want to draw attention to herself walking in the house. She seen her dad on the couch sleep with the TV still on, so she was able to sneak past him easy. Jennifer proceeded to walk into the kitchen. However, she was stopped in her tracks with the horrible sight of seeing her mother lying in a pool of blood with her brain fragments scattered on the floor. She ran back to the couch where she found her father had been beaten to death as well. Who the hell would do such a heartless, evil thing? Of course, she was freaking out and she started looking for her 15-year-old sister, who was gone, nowhere to be found. Jennifer checked the garage and their car had been stolen. She then called the police to report what happened.
Police came and detectives began working fiercely on the case. The scene was a horrific mess. Investigators were initially restricted to follow up on the missing car, on which they issued a "be on lookout" as a lead. However, further talks with Jennifer revealed that her sister Heather may not have been abducted but possibly an accessory in the murders of her parents. While describing her sister, Jennifer mentioned Roderick Ferrell as a possible suspect in the crimes. Detectives investigated his background and discovered he was originally from Murray, Kentucky, and he had grown up in a dysfunctional home and was introduced to vampirism by a friend. Roderick Ferrell was obsessed with blood, death, demons, and Satan himself. He even began going around telling others he was a 500-year-old vampire named Visago, the third goetic demon. Roderick was a loner and an outcast who genuinely believed himself to be a demon and a vampire. He would be expelled from his high school in the ninth grade and was using both marijuana and LSD by the time he was 14 years old. Cocaine and heroin would be Rod's next step. Almost like he was possessed by the demon he claimed to be, Roderick would fly into absolute rages when he would interject both cocaine and heroin at the same time, allegedly breaking furniture in fits of anger. Emotional problems compounded by drug problems made him an emotional wreck. Rod Ferrell then began recruiting other members into his family, which he dubbed Vampire Clan. He brought on board Scott Anderson, Charity Cassie, and Dana Cooper, all from troubled families of their own. The cult was an outlet where he took out his frustrations on life. He would be expelled from his high school in the ninth grade and was using both marijuana and LSD by the time he was 14 years old. Cocaine and heroin would be Rod's next step. Almost like he was possessed by the demon he claimed to be, Roderick would fly into absolute rages when he would take both cocaine and heroin at the same time, allegedly breaking furniture in fits of anger. Emotional problems compounded by drug problems made him an emotional wreck. Rod Ferrell then began recruiting members into his family, which he dubbed Vampire Clan. He brought on board Scott Anderson, Charity Cassie, and Dana Cooper, all from troubled families of their own. The cult was an outlet where he took out his frustrations on life. Rod Ferrell and his mom moved back and forth between Murray and Eustis, Florida, after his grandparents acquired a home in the area around 1990. While living there, Ferrell became friends with Heather Windorf, who was described as a troubled Eustis High School sophomore who often rebelled against her parents. Roderick Ferrell moved back to Kentucky after the breakup of his mother and her boyfriend. Heather and Roderick would call each other collect, running up expensive phone bills until her parents put a stop to it, making Heather extremely angry, according to her sister. Letters sent by Heather were obtained by detectives and revealed that the 15-year-old regularly mentioned how their home was hell and how she wished her parents were murdered. Hearing stories from Heather about suffering abuse at the hands of her father struck a chord with Roderick. The final straw for Roderick was when Heather's parents finally cut her off from the phone. It was then he rallied his group to go on the faithful rescue mission to save Heather from her parents and run away to New Orleans to start their own vampire family. Roderick and four of his cult members drove from Murray, Kentucky to Eustis, Florida to pick up Heather. After she had been picked up and the vehicle broke down, Heather made a deal with Roderick in which she would use her keys to unlock her home so that her family's vehicle could be stolen and that and they could complete their trip to New Orleans. In exchange, Roderick agreed to perform turning ritual in which she would consume his blood and officially be a vampire forever. The ritual took place early that morning at the Eustis Cemetery. Roderick consumed a significant amount of LSD before Heather admitted to drinking Roderick's blood from a self-inflicted razor blade wound. The group departed to retrieve the car from Heather's house shortly after. When they arrived at the Windorf residence, Roderick and Scott entered the house through the garage to find Mr. Windorf sound asleep on the living room couch. After many moments of silence and deliberation, Mr. Windorf awoke to his skull being violently smashed in by Roderick and the crowbar Rod had in his hand with him. Mr. Windorf suffered from more than 22 blows to the face. Hearing the commotion, Mrs. Windorf ran into the living room from the kitchen, horrified at the sight of her husband being beaten to death. To stop them, she splashed scalding hot coffee into the face of Roderick, who retaliated with a crowbar blow to the face. The blow was so hard it severed her brainstem, killing her instantly. After savagely murdering both parents, Ferrell, Anderson, Kesey, Cooper, and Heather fled in the 1993 Ford Explorer. They drove through 4 states in 4 days before they ran out of money in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, at which point Charity Kesey contacted her grandmother, who promptly notified the police to their whereabouts. She tricked the teens into driving to a local Howard Johnson hotel where detectives had laid a trap. All four were arrested without incident and booked into the Lake County Jail. In 1998, Ferrell pleaded guilty to the charges of first-degree murder, but claimed the others traveling with him were innocent, and that Anderson, while an accessory, only watched and did not touch the Windorfs. Ferrell was sentenced to death, making him the youngest inmate on death row. However, Roger Ferrell's sentence was commuted to life by Florida Supreme Court because he was only 16 when the crime was committed. By that time, it was pretty obvious. I had blood on me and a crowbar in my hand. I was fixing to say, "Yeah, I want to have coffee with you, son of a bitching smartass." But anyway, then that's when she lunged at me, 'cause I was actually going to let her live. But after she lunged at me, I just took the bottom of the crowbar and kept stabbing it through her skull. And whenever she fell down, I just continually beat her until I saw her brains falling on the floor, 'cause that pissed me off. Roderick Farrell.